Hey friends, welcome back to Myths and Musings. This is episode 1. I want to share a little bit about who I am and what I do, and that may perhaps give you a sense of whether we are connected or not. I am a Bulgarian by birth and roots, a Londoner by nurture and expression, and a Lisbonite through transformation. A lifelong seeker of meaning through stories, myths, legends, and perhaps ultimately connection. I'm someone who loves to create, and over the last couple of years I have been creating new connections, new friendships, networks, channels of meaning. I have been reconnecting to parts of me that were sleeping. I have been reconnecting to parts of me that were forgotten about, and also connecting to new people and places and visions that help to form who I am becoming more of day by day, and also what I am unbecoming. And these will be some things, whether through my own shares or whether through the stories that some of my future guests get to share with you, we unravel. I have a deep interest in astrology. I have a deep reverence of astrology. This wasn't the first practice that literally sucked me in. However, it's been a practice that I have never fallen out of love with, and it's no longer just an interest. It is my work. It's a tool for guidance. It's a way of understanding myself. It's a way for me to see you, to really see you. I joke that I am a very unconventional secret keeper, because each time I sit with you and your chart, your secret source stares at me. And this was also a practice that validated me in a way that I really needed at the time when I was seeking that kind of validation. I first encountered astrology as a child through stories and myths and legends, and when I moved to London, I was already living in London as a teenager. I moved there as a child with my family, and as a young teen I became fascinated by the characteristics of each zodiac sign. The strengths, the challenges, the nuances. I had notebooks and notebooks of all of the different traits each sign would have. In Bulgaria, where I'm from, it's quite common to visit astrologers, and we are a culture that's rather open to practices like that. Sometimes it shows itself in the form of coffee cup readings. Sometimes it presents itself in our reverence and connection to nature and the cycles of nature. And then sometimes it's there in your chart, in your natal chart, and access to astrologers and mystics and visionaries is very available. And so even though in some cultures astrology was at some point, it's now having a total revival, but even though at some point it was dismissed and maybe to some extent still is as woo-woo, for me it has always been a practical, grounding, spiritual tool. Very similar but also different to the practice of yoga. And we will get to speak about that at some point also. I received my first astrology reading at the age of 19, more or less, which in hindsight, that was my first nodal return. And that reading really stuck with me, especially one statement the then astrologer made. And the astrologer was a lady who had a lot of authority in her field. She was a social researcher as well as an astrologer. And she told me at the grand old age of 19 that I would have 2 marriages. Now, many years after 19 and after that moment, I am yet to have 1, let alone 2. So that statement became a lens through which I viewed all of my relationships. For years, I carried that quote-unquote prophecy in my mind and in my body, very possibly, wondering if each relationship was husband 1 or husband 2. Maybe not each one, but the more meaningful ones, for sure. And it wasn't until much later when I started approaching astrology from a different perspective and I started engaging with it in a different way that I realized how powerful it is to reclaim your narrative. And it became a practice with time that I started seeing as a tool to co-create. It isn't about predictions that control your life, even though, full disclaimer, I do use the practice as a predictive tool. I use timing techniques to predict the potential and the possibility of certain events and eventualities. It is a tool to see possibilities. And beyond that, it's a tool to understand patterns, to understand our patterns, and to work with our own power, to recognize and see our own power, and to reclaim, or maybe even for the first time, claim our narratives. Before diving deeper into astrology professionally, I had a different life, a very different life. And it was all about sales and people management. And I had some amazing opportunities to work for some really cool and meaningful missions and companies and startups. And I had the tendency to give it my all, to live for other people's dreams and visions because I believed in them so much. Often prioritizing those other visions and dreams over my own. And then around my late 20s and early 30s, I had a nervous breakdown. And some years later, a couple of years later, not that many, I understood that coincided with what we all know and reluctantly need to learn to accept and welcome into our experience, aka our first Saturn return. That breakdown forced me to reevaluate everything. Each structure in my life was falling or had already fallen. and it was time to rebuild, and I didn't know where to start or how. My personal life, my work, my health, my relationships, everything fell apart within a year. And it was one of the best experiences. I wasn't thinking that at the time, but I do claim that now, that I have ever had, because it completely changed my life, because it presented itself as an invitation for me to reassess things that were working and create gratitude and space for those things to continue flourishing, and to reassess the things that weren't working and let them go. And that was hard, and that was a lot of suffering. It was chaotic, and in that chaos, 2 practices became my lifeline. One was already in my life, and that was the practice of yoga. It was where I felt the most grounded. It was my escape. I had other means of escaping also. I had means to numb, which weren't very pleasant. At the time they were. And they did not lead to the type of escape I actually needed. They were ways to keep escaping from myself. The other practice, or the other lifeline, was work with children. And so yoga and working with children were 2 ways in which I started reconnecting to myself again. Working with children taught me patience. So much patience. Taught me presence, and it reminded me of joy. Little by little, day by day, it really was my only joy. Eventually, I retrained as a family yoga teacher, and travel became a purposeful part of my healing and exploration. I was no longer traveling to escape or to sit on a beach and enjoy the sun, as much as I love to do that. It really grew into a mission, a way of connecting to myself, and a way of stretching myself, a way where escape brought me back to the very beginning, home. That journey inevitably led to Portugal, where my path with this work and in this phase of life truly began to unfold. And so I share this with you from the place that brought so much transformation to me and my life. And that was also not an overnight occurrence. More stories for another time, for sure. It was possibly a 4-year journey from the first day I stepped to Portugal to the day I actually moved. And as we dive deeper into these practices, I would love to share with you how the timing of certain events really was supported by my own astrology. So astrology and wellness practices became so intertwined in my life as I continued exploring cycles. The moon was my first connection to this vast art form. Rituals and intentional living were already part of my life, and they strengthened. Astrology helped me consolidate some of my experiences and showed me the importance of service, of devotion, and ultimately acceptance. Service became a way to offer guidance and support and validation to others, the very thing I found so helpful in this practice myself. Devotion showed up as a way that I had to commit to my path, where I had been devoted to others, beings, ideas, deities, practices, and it was time to devote to my path and to commit to my path and to grow within my purpose and to claim the alignment that my soul had chosen, and I needed to give space, words, and a form to it. And ultimately, each relationship, husband or no husband, friendships, professional connections, or every other person that has crossed my path, is still in it or is no longer in it. And also, mostly, the relationship with my parents has led me to what I believe is the ultimate way of this practice, and that is acceptance. And it's really the bridge between service and devotion. It's also allowing life to unfold as it needs to letting go of control, hashtag valorizing, and to trust the process. Hashtag Pisces Sun. So welcome to a little bit of my own chart here. For me, these three words, service, devotion, and acceptance, are the foundation of my purpose. And it was through astrology that I learned that nothing exists in isolation. Our experiences, our relationships, our challenges, and our growth are all so connected. And of course, there are other practices that also invite us to come into that realization and create a relationship with it. And they were also present in my life, yoga being the other. Along the line of diving deeper and deeper into this black hole that is the astrology field, I developed a really keen interest with Chiron, the wounded healer. Chiron represents our recurring wounds and our potential to transform those experiences into gifts that help others. Chiron is part of us in so many profound ways that we can also share with others. And in my chart, surprise, surprise, Chiron is the most visible of all of my planets and points. And it guides me in my work. It guides me in my creativity, my commitment to help others through astrology, through writing, and through wellness practices. Over the last few years, this creativity has manifested in the form of oracle decks and poetry. I became a poet. I've created several decks, including one that I called the Chiron deck. It really needed to be called the Chiron deck, which I am preparing to soon release. These decks are tools, teaching aids, as well as guides designed to help people connect with their own intuition and inner wisdom. What I've learned through all of this is that astrology isn't about doom and gloom. If only, and I am a perpetual what-ifer, if only I had heard something else from that astrologer back when I was 19, perhaps my life would have taken a different form, and it would not have been my life. And this path has led me to this place of realization and conviction in the power of co-creation. Seeing your potential, understanding your cycles, and making empowered choices. It's about receiving, trusting, and working with the energies around you. So as I step into more visibility with this podcast, with my work, as I strengthen my commitment to my path, and with sharing my story, I'm inviting you to also do the same, to explore, to grow, and to live intentionally. And these are all themes that I aim to practice daily, and some days are better than others. And if you're curious about astrology for yourself, here is my advice. Unsolicited, but nonetheless. Choose to work with an astrologer you feel connected to. Whether you want to be learning parts of your chart with more depth for yourself, whether you want to receive an astrology session from an astrologer, feel connected to that person, to someone that you on some level feel and believe will get you. Look for someone you can trust and have a conversation with. This is ultimately not a monologue. It is a dialogue, and you are invited to share your story with your practitioner in a way that makes you feel safe and supported, so that the practitioner can do their job best in supporting you with what they see through your chart. Astrology should empower you. It's about guidance, insight, it's about clarity and not fear. Yes, we can see things that are really unpleasant, and the way they are delivered can make or break your experience, and this is the case with most things. Ask questions that help you feel into the experience, not just about technical placements. Even though it is a technical practice, it is completely open to interpretation. And if you have ever come to my in-person sessions, you would have heard me say, this is the most contradictory of all practices I share. And that I also know and I still love it so much. Above all, astrology is a lifelong study, a lifelong relationship, a lifelong commitment, and a lifelong practice, if you choose it to be. And for me, cultivating that relationship is both a privilege and a purpose. Thank you for joining me for this first episode. I am so excited to share more stories, insights, guidance with you along the way in future episodes to come. Remember, every story has its wisdom. Keep learning, keep growing, and keep sharing your own story boldly and in your truth. Thank you for listening. This was Myths and Musings with me, Martina. Until next time.